Guys, welcome to the second video on cladistics. So I have three goals for you guys today. First off, I want students can compare and contrast different species concepts. Secondly, students can describe methods used to reveal phylogeny, basically a fancy way of saying the relationship between animals. And third, students can explain how a cladogram is constructed. Now, first off, before we can do any of that though, guys, we have to come to a question. What is a species? Now, species originally came back to a very early idea, and really it came into this. A species can be figured out by their differences in appearance. So a black and a pink butterfly would be a different species because, hey, they look different. However, this doesn't really work for a lot of animals. For example, I don't know, humans. Because a lot of animals can look different but still be a part of the same species. For example, with humans. Humans are considered the same species, but in fact, we can look very different. There are humans who are very dark-skinned. There are humans who are very white-skinned. There are humans with blue eyes, humans with brown eyes, humans with blonde hair, humans with redheads. I mean, God, there are redheads out there. Man, look at redheads. They're crazy as it is. So the idea that you can make a species based upon how it looks doesn't really hold up, because if that was the case, that would mean there are hundreds of types of human species, but we don't really buy that, do we? It's more complicated than that. So we came up with a new rule back about in the late 1800s, and the new rule of species is called the modern species definition, and essentially it comes down to this. Any two animals that can breed and can have fertile babies. Now, what that means is this. If two animals can have a kid, and that baby is able to have a kid, well then guess what? They're a species. That makes them a species. So for example, dogs can look really different from one to the next. Look at this weird, ugly dog right here. But this dog here can still have a baby with a Rottweiler, and that Rottweiler will be able to have babies. So dogs can have babies with other dogs, and they make perfectly fertile dogs. They make dogs who can have dogs. Now, that's not true of some animals. Let me give an example. If I take a lion and a tiger and I make them have a baby, we get an animal we call a liger. Now, a liger cannot have babies. It is not able to make gametes, gametes being like sperm cells and egg cells, so it's infertile. So we don't consider lions and tigers as part of the same species because they can't have babies together that will work in the long term. So, with this in mind, guys, now we're going to hop into something that I know can be a little bit controversial in schools, at Riyadh schools. So I need to preface this with why I'm teaching you guys it in the first place. We're getting into concepts that are going into evolution. Now, I know evolution is one of those topics that it's a little bit, we don't talk about, humans, evolution, all that. It's not a good topic to talk about at Riyadh schools. However, you are going to see this stuff if you go to the United States, if you go to college in the West. So you still have to know kind of how these rules work and what the ideas here are. Otherwise, you are not going to be able to get into a good college in the United States. So whether you agree with them or not important. At this point in time, I just want to teach you guys how biologists think about this, because this will be on your guys' exams when it comes to going to the United States or in Great Britain or in Australia, wherever you decide to go. Now, with that being said, let's go into phylogeny. Phylogeny is basically classifying species on how closely related they are. I have a great little chart right here that does a great job. So, if you guys remember the whole order, family, genus, species thing we talked about beforehand, what we have here is different orders of the Carnivoria. So Carnivoria are basically animals that eat meat. Well, there are three types of families within Carnivoria. We have Felidae, which goes into the cat species. So this is the family of cats, goes in this group. We have the Mustelidae. Now this is kind of like the weasels and the little ground weasels. And then we have the Canidae, which are the dogs and the wolves and the foxes. Now you get even more specific with the genus, which you like the Pantheria, which is going to be the panthers. You have the Taxopedia, which is the badgers. You have the Ludia, which looks like it's either going to be in a ferret? Yeah, I'm going to say ferret on that one. And we had the canis, which is basically a canine, so like dogs and foxes and wolves. And all these animals are related to each other in some way. And you can see how closely related they are based upon how far back they are on this phylogenetic tree. And that's what phylogeny does. Phylogeny looks to see how closely related animals are to one another. Now, before I move on, guys, I wanted to put this little chart up here because you're going to have to be able to know this information later on. And it's like you want to be able to compare the different concepts of species. Now, we have the phylogenetic concept, which basically talks about how closely related they are, which you see right here. You have the biological species concept, which is the idea about, hey, can they make babies? And then you have what's called the typological species concept, which is basically saying, hey, do they look similar? And each one of these has a limitation and a benefit to it. So there's a lot to go on for this. And I don't think I'm going to have you memorize this chart, but I will definitely have you refer to it in some of your activities later on, guys. Okay, now, next idea. Characteristics, or the book calls it characters. A character is just a trait is different from one animal to the next. So these differences can be morphological, like for example, right here you have what looks to be a type of raptor versus here, which is a type of bird. Now, there's a lot of morphological differences between these two animals. That's just basically physical differences between them. Obviously, this guy's going to be taller. This guy's smaller. This guy has a beak. This guy kind of has a beak, but not really. This guy has a weird little mohawk thing going. So does this guy. So there are some similarities, but there are also lots of differences too. The differences can also be chemical as well. So you can look at two animals and they might have different chemicals they can create. Now, I want to go ahead and look at this comparison here because it gives you a better idea. Now, I've already explained morphological very well, so I don't think I have to go too much about this. An example of a morphological difference would be like a wolf versus a human. Wolves have very sharp teeth in the front of their mouths, and humans don't. That's a morphological difference. Now, chemical is something like this. It's a difference in the chemicals an animal can make. For example, mammals can make milk. Birds can't. So that would be a chemical difference between the two of us. Okay, now one final idea, guys, before I believe I'm done. Cladistics. Cladistics is just a fancy way of ordering organisms based upon how closely related they are. Now, if you go back to the picture I showed right here, this is kind of like a cladistic diagram because it's showing you how closely related they are. But cladograms are a little more specific. This right here is a cladogram. So when I say cladogram, what I'm really saying is I'm talking about this thing right here. And really what a cladogram is that every single time there's a difference between an animal, you mention what that difference is. So for example, anything below down over here isn't going to have vertebrae. Vertebrae is the back part, is your spinal cord. It's a part of the back of your body. So for example, sharks have vertebrae. Now, as you move up this list though, now you have a bony skeleton. Well, if you know anything about sharks don't actually have bones in their skeletons. They have cartilage. So they're very different animals. So sharks are on their own little group up here because they don't have bones. However, everything from here on up has bones because birds have bones, crocodiles have bones, monkeys have bones. So all these guys are more closely related. Now, if you have 4 limbs, well, guess what? Everything from here on up has 4 limbs. Okay, sweet. If you have what's called an amniotic egg, which is a very fancy term, basically it means you have a thing called amnion inside the egg, which everything above here does. That means that you are either one of these animals right here. Now you can move farther up. If say you have hair, okay, well if you have hair, you're going this direction. If you have eggs with shells, you're going this direction over here. So this direction here is eggs and shells. This direction over here is going to be having hair. So a cladogram just tells you what differences exist between each one of these groups of animals. And that's all they are. And you can make cladograms as exact as you want, or you can make them as big as you want. They're just a way to see how closely related different animal species are. Oops. Now, here are the key terms, guys, you're going to need to know for this chapter. Make sure you put these into your Cornell notes. And that's it, guys. Thank you very much for watching the video, and I hope you guys can get to work on the activities.